Today we're going to talk about the conclusion of Trump's second impeachment trial, a shameless stunt by Mitch McConnell in the wake of Trump's acquittal, and my interview with Al Franken, where we focus on Trump's defense lawyers, with Al even throwing back to the SNL days and doing some character work. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. Donald Trump's second impeachment trial is over. He was acquitted with what was actually a surprisingly higher number of Republicans joining Democrats for a final tally of 57 to 43. Those Republicans include Senators Burr, Collins, Cassidy, Murkowski, Romney, Sass, and Toomey. Now, whether just for posterity or if you didn't watch the trial, I just want to reiterate the core elements of that case that the impeachment managers, led by Jamie Raskin, put forward. And those three elements that prove Trump's guilt are this. One, was the violence on January 6th foreseeable? Was it predictable that the crowd at the Stop the Steal rally was poised for violence if provoked? And the answer is of course. When Trump went to the podium, he knew that those in attendance were inflamed, that they were armed, and that they were ready for violence. The seeds for that violence were sown by him with the big lie, this idea that the election was rigged, that Trump was the victim of some massive conspiracy against him. And Trump had spread that lie over the course of months, inflaming his base, which resulted in death threats and real-world violence. And yet Trump rewarded his supporters who resorted to violence. He rewarded those who encircled a Biden bus in Texas and ultimately tried to drive that bus off the road, tweeting, "I love Texas." He attacked Georgia's Secretary of State, and when his supporters sent death threats, Trump attacked Raffensperger further. He validated those threats. It was clear and proven that his supporters would resort to violence and that he supports that. The guy even dumped $50 million in ads targeting those very people to further promote his Stop the Steal message. Those same people who he knew to be violent. Like, the FBI even issued a report warning of a, quote, war at the Capitol. If the FBI knew, the president knew. There was no doubt that the risk of violence was foreseeable, and yet still he continued to perpetuate the lie. The second question is, did he encourage the violence? Standing in that powder keg, did Donald Trump light a match? Yes. Consider some of the quotes that he offered from January 6th.
Here today do not want to see our election victory stolen. There's never been anything like this. It's a pure theft in American history. Everybody knows it. Make no mistake, this election was stolen from you, from me, and from the country. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. And to use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal.
And when the crowd chanted at him, "Fight for Trump," here's what he said.
Thank you.
He said thank you. He then quite literally sent them to Congress. He told them to fight like hell and sent them to the Capitol. He even implied it was okay to break the law because the election was being stolen. He said, when you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. Like, it's clear. He said it and his supporters did it. And we know that because the supporters said they were acting on Trump's behalf. Trump is calling on us to fight. That was their quote. In their desperation to show their allegiance to the guy, they just proved the case against him, that he was responsible. Even those in his own party acknowledged that Trump encouraged it. Senators, members of Congress, Republican governors, Chris Christie, Adam Kinzinger, John Katko, Ben Sass, Mitt Romney. And so clearly he encouraged the violence. And finally, the last question, did Trump act willfully in his actions that encouraged that violence? He stood before an armed, angry crowd known to be ready for violence at his provocation. And what did he do? He provoked them. He aimed them at the Capitol and told them to fight like hell, and they did. And it was his conduct after that proved that he acted willfully. He tweeted a video during the insurrection that said, quote, "We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election and everyone knows it." He tweeted during the insurrection, "These are the things and events that happen when an election is stolen from us." And so when he had the opportunity to quell the violence, he chose instead to validate their very reason for committing it. Like, consider too, when Trump wants to stop something, he does it. Easily, quickly. Some errant synapse fires in Trump's brain, some fleeting thought pops into his head. He will tweet it out in half a second to 88 million people. And yet suddenly, over the course of a 5-hour-long attack on the Capitol, he did nothing other than post a few tweets that reiterated the cause for that riot. He never condemned the attack. He never condemned the attackers. He never said that he was sending help. He reacted exactly as someone would who was delighted Even as a police officer was killed, even after his own supporter was shot and killed, even after his own vice president faced assassination. Trump's reaction is evidence of his intent. He reacted exactly as he would if he intended for a mob to overtake the Capitol. And so clearly the impeachment manager's case was a home run. It was beyond dispute and managed to persuade some Republicans who, frankly, I'd have never expected to break ranks. But one of the senators who voted to acquit, unsurprisingly, was Mitch McConnell. And that was despite having primed his conference to vote their consciences. But here's what McConnell said after the final vote that made me feel like I was living on a different planet.
January 6th was a disgrace. American citizens attacked their own government. They used terrorism to try to stop a specific piece of domestic business they did not like. Fellow Americans beat and bloodied our own police. They stormed the Senate floor. They tried to hunt down the Speaker of the House. They built a gallows and chanted about murdering the Vice President. They did this because they'd been fed wild falsehoods by the most powerful man on earth. Because he was angry he lost an election. Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot for a disgraceful dereliction of duty. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth.
And this was after the guy just voted to acquit him. Like, if only Mitch McConnell of 10 minutes earlier could have heard Mitch McConnell, he might have voted differently. And so that begs the question, what the hell? And so here's the answer that McConnell ultimately gave.
Justice Joseph Story, our nation's first great constitutional scholar, as he explained nearly 200 years ago, the process of impeachment and conviction is a narrow tool for a narrow purpose. Story explained this limited tool exists to, quote, secure the state against gross official misdemeanors, end quote. That is, to protect the country from government officers. If President Trump were still in office, I would have carefully considered whether the House managers proved their specific charge. But in this case, the question is moot because former President Trump is constitutionally not eligible for conviction.
That impeachment is a narrow tool to protect the country from government officers, and that because Trump is no longer in office, he's no longer eligible for impeachment. Now, first off, the only reason that Trump's not being tried while he's in office is because of Mitch McConnell himself. It was him who stopped Democrats from scheduling this trial until after Biden was inaugurated. In other words, McConnell's basically saying, yes, Trump is guilty, but the only time he could be tried lawfully in the Senate is exactly when I prevented it. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And aside from that, that's not the only role of impeachment. Like, there's this theory among Republicans that the only purpose of impeachment is to remove current officials from office. Here is what the literal Constitution says. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. Removal and disqualification from running again. The point is twofold. So while Trump might already be out of office, the point of impeachment is still valid under his term. And so, look, McConnell can lean on these strained legal arguments, but the fact is that because he voted to acquit, he is complicit in the very event that he so sanctimoniously railed against. When you fail to hold someone accountable for inciting an insurrection, that is a tacit endorsement of it. You don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to say, well, I'm against it, but I'm also unwilling to hold you responsible for causing it. And if he really thought this was that bad, then why refuse to allow the trial until after Trump was out of office? His entire argument is predicated on his own failure to let this trial begin sooner, considering he was in charge of the Senate schedule. And look, I don't know exactly what McConnell's aim is here, but I can promise you that it's political, and that it's politically advantageous to him. Mitch McConnell doesn't do anything unless he stands to benefit politically. There is no conscience or integrity or humanity. There is politics, and that's it. So most likely, he may have done it to try and lure some of the donors who'd been spooked by Trump back into the party, basically by saying, hey, look, I acknowledge how bad this was. Don't worry. The crazy GOP is gone. It's just me, the establishment. But any donors who hear that, within an hour of that very person voting to acquit Trump, should feel insulted, to say the least. You don't get to distance yourself from the very thing that you just endorsed. McConnell had the chance to make his position known. He doesn't get to have it both ways. So with regard to Trump's acquittal, am I disappointed? Of course. Am I surprised? No. But two things are going to happen from here, both of which are critical in terms of never seeing Trump in office again. The first is that he's not even close to being out of the woods legally. He has to deal with the criminal justice system now. He's already being investigated by the Fulton County DA for his phone call demanding Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger find 11,780 votes. He's in the crosshairs of the D.C. Attorney General for inciting the insurrection, the New York AG for his corporation. And guess what? Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and the rest of Trump's breathless sycophants don't run those offices. Actual law enforcement officials do. So Trump might seem impervious to consequences in the world of politics, but we are in an entirely different realm here. And two, we focus on Democrats' agenda, which is popular. We're already seeing progress on major legislative wins, from DACA to climate change, $15 minimum wage, stimulus checks, vaccine distribution. So our job is to keep giving people a reason to vote for Democrats, and a reason to reject the politics of fear that Trump needs to run on. He promised that a Biden win would mean a tanked economy, lost jobs, a mismanaged vaccine distribution, and full-blown socialism. And so his supporters are about to see firsthand what the rest of us have known all along, that he was always a liar. So whether it's contending with the criminal justice system or Biden's success, Trump's post-presidency life isn't going to be doing him any favors. To listen to my interview with Al Franken about Trump's impeachment trial, with Al even throwing back to the SNL days and doing some character work, check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel.